When Sarah inherited her grandfather's crumbling estate in the deep woods of Maine, she expected cobwebs and old memories, not a cold, lingering dread. The house sat like a rotting tooth in the middle of a dense forest that local legends claimed was hungry. Sarah, a writer looking for solitude, felt the weight of the silence the moment she stepped onto the porch. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, pressurized void, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the first mistake. In the center of the overgrown backyard stood an ancient stone well, its mouth covered by a heavy, rusted iron grate. Her grandfather's last letter had one underlined warning: never open the well. Some echoes are meant to stay buried. Sarah stared at it from the kitchen window, the gray stones looking like cold skin. She told herself it was just an old man's superstition, but every time she looked away, she felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic attraction to the dark circle in the grass. The first night was restless. A storm was brewing, and the wind began to whistle through the cracks in the old floorboards. But beneath the wind, there was another sound, a rhythmic, wet slapping, like someone walking with soaked shoes on the wooden porch. Sarah sat up, her heart drumming against her ribs. She looked out the window, and in a flash of lightning, she saw the iron grate on the well. It wasn't flat anymore. It looked like something was pushing it from below. On the third day, the whispers began. They didn't come from the woods. They came from the pipes in the house. When she turned on the faucet, the water ran dark for a second, and a voice, thin and reedy, hissed her name. "Sarah, help us." It sounded exactly like her younger sister who had gone missing 20 years ago. The grief she had buried so deep came rushing back, a cold tide that threatened to drown her logic. Curiosity and grief are a dangerous combination. Driven by the hope of hearing her sister again, Sarah took a crowbar to the backyard. The air around the well was 10 degrees colder, and the scent of stagnant water and old copper was overwhelming. As she pried the rusted iron grate open, the metal screamed in protest. When the grate finally fell aside, a deep, hollow groan echoed from the depths, as if the earth itself was sighing in relief. Sarah leaned over the edge, shining her flashlight into the abyss. The beam struggled to pierce the thick, black fog rising from the water far below. But then, the surface shimmered. Instead of her own reflection, she saw hundreds of pale, upturned faces staring back at her. Their eyes were wide, and their mouths were open in silent screams. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes, the remnants of everyone the forest had ever taken. That evening, Sarah noticed the first change. Her fingernails were turning a dark, muddy gray, and her skin felt cold to the touch, no matter how much she cranked up the heat. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes seemed to be losing their color, fading into the same dull gray as the stones of the well. The house began to feel less like a shelter and more like an extension of the well, the walls damp and smelling of earth. The shadows in the house began to detach themselves from the corners. They didn't move like shadows. They moved like liquid, flowing across the floor toward her. Sarah tried to run to her car, but the front door wouldn't budge. The wood had swollen and fused with the frame, turning the house into a wooden ribcage. She was trapped, and the whispers were no longer coming from the pipes. They were coming from inside her own head. The well began to feed on her memories. She tried to remember her mother's face, but it was blurry, replaced by the image of the well's dark mouth. She tried to think of her life in the city, but the sounds of the subway were replaced by the rhythmic thumping of the earth. The entity in the well wasn't just taking her body. It was erasing her existence, rewriting her history into the silence of the Maine woods. A figure emerged from the basement, a dripping, mud-covered version of Sarah herself. This double moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its joints cracking like dry twigs. It didn't have a face, just a smooth surface of wet clay where features should be. It started mimicking Sarah's movements, a horrifying dance of the self and the void. Every time the double moved, Sarah felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her own limbs. The walls of the house began to sprout roots. Massive, black vines tore through the wallpaper, bringing the forest inside. The living room was quickly becoming a grove of dead trees. Sarah realized the house was being digested. The well was the stomach, and the house was the mouth. She scrambled to the second floor, but the stairs were turning into a mudslide, pulling her back down toward the darkness. In a moment of pure terror, Sarah saw her grandfather. He wasn't a ghost. He was part of the wall, his skin turned to bark, his eyes two knots in the wood. He whispered one final truth. The well doesn't want your life, Sarah. It wants your voice. It needs someone to keep the echoes alive. The realization that she was just the latest vessel for the well's hunger broke her remaining spirit. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a cacophony of voices. Thousands of people, all screaming their names at once. The sound was so loud that the windows shattered, and Sarah's ears began to bleed. It was the harvest song of the well. The pressure was so intense that she fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the muddy floor, her identity dissolving into the wall of noise. The mud on the floor turned into a whirlpool, dragging Sarah toward the center of the house, which now connected directly to the well. She didn't fight it anymore. She felt a strange, cold peace as the water rose to meet her. As she sank into the black depths, she felt her sister's hand grab hers. But it wasn't a hand of flesh. It was a hand of cold, wet stone. A week later, a real estate agent arrived at the house. He found the front door wide open, the house smelling of fresh pine and damp earth. The well in the back was covered by a brand new iron grate, looking as if it had never been touched. As he turned to leave, he heard a faint, melodic whistle coming from the pipes. He paused, listening. It was a beautiful, haunting tune. He didn't know that the whistle was the last thing Sarah had ever heard. And now, it was her turn to lure the next visitor.